Well, this is going to start a series we're calling Inspiring Bible Stories. And sometimes as I'm doing my Bible reading, I just come across a story and I'll write myself a note. Sometimes I'll even write points to the passage and write myself a note saying, study this or develop this or do a message or a lesson on this later. And I've done that for 30 plus years. Sometimes the most inspiring outlines for teaching and preaching come from your personal Bible reading. And so unfortunately, you're all going to have to suffer through what I consider my stories that really resonate with me. Now, for one thing, I like humor, and there's definitely some humor in this story. I like action. There's a lot of action. I like conflict. I like adventure. I like all of these things. So these stories are going to probably involve elements of some or all of them every week, but we're just going to start with this one for no specific reason, but I'm not going to read the entire passage. It may be a story somewhat familiar to some of you, but I think for most of us, we don't remember all of the details. So we're just going to jump in 1 Kings chapter 20, verse 13, read down a ways, and then we'll fill in the blanks. And behold, there came a prophet unto Ahab, king of Israel, saying, Thus saith the Lord, hast thou seen all this great multitude? Behold, I will deliver it into thine hand this day, and thou shalt know that I am the Lord. And Ahab said, By whom? And he said, Thus saith the Lord, even by the young men of the princes of the provinces. Then Ahab said, Who shall order the battle? I guess if you're going to come up with a title to this lesson, it would be in that question right there. Who shall order the battle? Ahab asks. And he, the prophet, said, Thou. Then he numbered the young men of the princes of the provinces, and they were 232. And after them he numbered all the people, even all the children of Israel, being 7,000. And they went out at noon, but Ben-Hadad was drinking himself drunk in the pavilions. He must have been aligned with these guys in my neighborhood last night. They'd hang out there and just drink. He and the kings, the 32 kings that helped him, and the young men of the princes of the provinces went out first, and Ben-Hadad sent out, and they told him, saying, There are men come out of Samaria, which is a surprise to him because they had besieged the city and had seen nobody for several days on end. And he said, Whether they be come out for peace, take them alive, or whether they be come out for war, take them alive. And so these young men of the princes of the provinces came out of the city, and the army which followed them, and they slew every one his man. And the Syrians fled, and Israel pursued them, and Ben-Hadad, the king of Syria, escaped on an horse with the horsemen, and the king of Israel went out and smote the horses and chariots and slew the Syrians with a great slaughter. Isn't that a great story? How can that not appeal to any one of us here, just reading? And if you're like me, you want to read what happens after that. And there was another battle that took place about a year later, a follow-up battle. There were things that happened before. So in a nutshell, this story is a story about a king who we know was not exactly great in character, who was put on the spot. And it reveals to us all the responsibility we have to get involved in the battle. But let me give you a little background. This event happened when the nation of Israel was divided between the northern and southern kingdom. You remember that period of their history. There were 10 tribes in the north, 2 in the south, and the capital of the northern kingdom was Samaria. And a Syrian king by the name of Ben-Hadad was just wreaking havoc over the whole area. He would just take one city after another, and he was overthrowing these cities and these armies with relative ease, probably due because he had developed a confederacy of other kings from other nations, numbering 32 other armies, came to his aid in his already vast army. And so they were basically sweeping the area and destroying anybody who stood to oppose them. Even when the city was well fortified, they would just wait outside and besiege that city until they had nothing more to eat or to drink, and they would come in and overthrow them. And if they gave up easily, they were probably a little lighter on them, but if they resisted, it was really bad for them. So Ben-Hadad was very arrogant, and he had a great army behind him. You can imagine him being so. He had a lot of other kings fighting for him. And he went to this city of Samaria. They wouldn't surrender. He besieged it, and he sent a message to the king there. The king's name was Ahab, and you know Ahab wasn't a good king. He's one of the worst kings Israel had ever had. And he issues really more of a statement than a request, or it wasn't terms for peace. It wasn't like, let's get together and talk this out, or come to an arrangement or a compromise. But if you go back to the earlier verses of this chapter, specifically verse 2 and 3, it says that Ben-Hadad sent messengers to Ahab, king of Israel, into the city, and said unto him, Thus saith Ben-Hadad, Thy silver and thy gold is mine. He didn't say, can I have it, or will you allow it to be, a part of a peace agreement? He says, it's mine. Thy wives also and thy children, even the goodliest, are mine. So you wonder how Ahab would respond to such a request. He's basically saying, I want all of your riches, and not only that, I want your wives and your children as well. So Ben-Hadad was being very forceful. He's saying, if you don't give them to me, we're going to destroy all of you. And Ahab had to make a decision here. It should not surprise us, knowing his character, that he said, okay, sure, you can have it all. You can have them all. It's yours. I really struggled with that as I read it. And we're not given all the details and the nuances of this story, but I want you men to put yourselves in that situation. If you were the king of a nation and somebody besieged your city with such a vast army outside the city walls and made such a request, what would your response be? I thought about some questions here. Did Ahab really expect Ben-Hadad to follow through on this? Or was it just sort of like, sometimes kings boast, military leaders boast, and threaten people, and okay, capitulate, whatever. I thought maybe he thought he could, there were several places within the city, the walled city of Samaria, where they could hide all those riches. They could take his treasures. He was a very greedy man, as you know the whole story of Ahab. He might have thought, okay, sure, they're yours. If you can find where I've hidden them, you can have all the gold and silver that's in the city. I wondered about that. I wondered if he thought that when Ben-Hadad requested the family members, it was just sort of symbolic. Like, okay, we're yours, I'm yours, they're yours. We're going to be in subservience to you. We surrender to you. We will meet your conditions. But that their everyday normal lives wouldn't change much, even though he said, they're yours. You can have my children, my wife. And all the men agreeing to this. I think maybe there's a precedent for that in some of the ways that the old armies in that period of history would go and take over a city, and they just make it subservient. They would pay taxes or tribute to the other king, and there would be servants who would do work for them, but they didn't really physically remove the wives and children from their husbands and fathers and bring and haul them off all the time to other places. I wonder if that was the arrangement that Ahab may have been thinking. Quite frankly, if I were Ahab, and a guy like Ben-Hadad came and said, your gold and silver, it's mine. Your wives and your children are mine. I tell you what I would have done. I would have cracked the front gate of the city open, pushed Jezebel outside the city limits, closed the gate behind, and said, good luck, you can have her. I would have got rid of Jezebel. She was bad news for everybody. But I don't know, whatever he was thinking, he capitulated. And this amounted to a full-fledged surrender, unconditional surrender, without ever fighting a battle, shooting an arrow, suffering one casualty. Ahab gave everything away inside that city without ever fighting. And that's really the basis for this story, is about we have to stand up for what's right. We have to engage in the Lord's work, and that means fighting some battles from time to time. He just gave up, and that showed his character. He was kind of cowardly. Perhaps a little surprised by this. There was no counter offer or whatever, or conditions spent on that. Ben-Hadad was emboldened. Okay, he's surrendering. We don't have to worry about staying out here, camped outside the city anymore. He said he sent another group of messengers, and this time, this is what he said. You can read the details in these early verses. He said, okay, I'm going to send in some troops, some soldiers in there, and whatever they want, they can have, and they're going to take it from the city. Well, maybe that didn't give Ahab the time to hide his treasures as quickly as he wanted to, or Maybe he thought to himself, well, I didn't know you're actually going to take it. We remove it from the... And of course, these soldiers that would come in, often they were paid, they were motivated to fight in an army like that because they got the spoils of war. In effect, they would entertain the spoils of war without ever having to fight a battle. By sending these soldiers in and saying, go wherever you want, take whatever you want, it worked out good for Ben-Hadad. And that's where Ahab said, oh, that's what you mean. You're actually going to come into my city and take anything of value that they want and remove it from the city. And so he kind of had some misgivings. Look down at verse 7. The king of Israel called all the elders of the land and said, mark, I pray you, and see how this man seeketh mischief. For he sent unto me for my wives and for my children and my silver and my gold, and I denied him not. But now he's going to send these soldiers in here, and whatever they want to take, they get to take. That's one of these humorous points. I think he means mischief. Really? Do you think he means mischief? I mean, he's parked outside your city limits. He's threatening to kill everybody. He's now going to send military troops in to take whatever they want. And he was having some second thoughts when he realized how this decision was going to affect not so much the other people in the nation, but affect him. Maybe Ahab thought, well, they'll come in and take some of the women and children, but they'll leave my family alone because after all, I'm the king. I'm the king of Samaria. And the reality of just what was going to happen began to settle in. And so the elders of the land, if you read on in the story, you find out the elders of the land had more character, more courage than Ahab did. And they said, absolutely not. We're not going to capitulate to that. We're not going to let him come in and take whatever they want. We're not going to take our wives and our children. And so that message got back with these messengers to Ben-Hadad. And as you can imagine, he was not too happy about that. Because in effect, what happened was they made an agreement that they're not sticking to. And he became furious. And in verse number 11, the king of Israel answered and said, tell him, let not him that girdeth on his harness boast himself as he that putteth it off. That was the old Hebrew rendition of, don't count your chickens before they hatch. Now, where was this? We wanted this out of Ahab early on. That should have been his initial response. But only after the elders put in their advice and he was following their counsel was he temporarily emboldened by the situation and said, yeah, we're not going to do that. Don't you think because you put on your harness, you're going to come in here and get whatever you want? You won't boast after you're able to go off after battle and take it off. Well, Ben-Hadad was a very arrogant, ruthless, murderous king. So now he's really infuriated and mad. So they're outside the city walls, and basically he and his leaders, his 32 kings from other nations fighting with him, they're out there in their tents getting drunk because they have nothing else to do while they're besieging the city. And he didn't even wait till the next day. He is so aggravated and infuriated with Ahab that he said, we're going to go take care of this right now. And, they set themselves in array, the Bible says. And that's where we get to our text. In our text, a key person in this story is a prophet who comes on the scene. And he comes to Ahab and tells him that God would give him the victory. Now, this is while Ahab is looking over the top of the city wall and looking at this multitude of people, thousands upon thousands. I'll give you some figures in a minute that we can derive from some follow-up information. There were over 100,000 soldiers encamped outside the city of Samaria. And these are not just, people out there having, enjoying Renaissance days or something. These are soldiers with weapons, and they're angry that they're away from their homes, and they want plunder, and they want to spoil the city, and they want to kill people. They're mad that they're having to wait for them to surrender. And he's looking over these walls and seeing these soldiers, and Ahab is wondering whether he really is doing the right thing. The wording that Ben-Hadad uses is that they were going to now come in, because he didn't keep his word, and destroy every living thing in that city. They were going to devastate it. The Bible says that Ben-Hadad said, we're going to reduce your city to dust. And there's so many of us out here, so many of the soldiers out here, that when we reduce your city to ashes and dust, there won't be enough for each soldier to grab a handful of dust and take it with them back home. I mean, that's how many men there were and how much devastation they were going to do. So now the terms of peace, just giving your wives, giving your gold, giving your silver, giving your children, all of that's out the door. Now you've angered me, Ben-Hadad says. You're going to pay the price for that. And so he kind of takes stock of what's going on here, and he realizes that the other army is huge. Ahab asks about how they're going to deal with this problem, and he said, God will deliver this vast army into your hands. And he kind of reverts back to his old self. He says, how's this going to take place? And he says, well, with these princes of the nation that are there. These princes were more like figureheads and political leaders. They were not generals. Ben-Hadad had generals. Ben-Hadad had access to 32 other armies of nations that would fight with him, well-armed people. And the man of God says, well, you got 32 political leaders here. It's the young Republican Party, kind of, a group of political people that are young, enthusiastic, and they're patriotic and so forth. They're gonna go out and destroy this vast army out there. And that's, of course, when the man of God had some real issues with how they're going to do this. They had 232 princes and another 7,000 soldiers that would go out to fight against them. So I want to give you some numbers that you can probably use. And I don't know exactly how many soldiers Ben-Hadad had. I do know this. When they lost the battle that we read about today, Ben-Hadad got away on his horse. They regrouped and came back a year later. And the Bible says, if you read on to this passage, that he regrew his army, probably bigger than he had before, certainly more determined than they were before, when he came back and returned here a year later. And when he came back and a second battle was to take place later, here's what we know. Ben-Hadad in that second battle lost 100,000 footmen. And there was an incident where they were running from the Israelites and they came into a city and the wall fell upon his soldiers. And there were so many people in that city that another 27,000 men died of the Syrian army when this wall fell on them. So those are just those who died. Those are the fatalities. 127,000 people died. Who knows how many of the enemy survived in that prediction? We're talking about a vast army. Judging from the description of those princes and the 7,000 men, I can conservatively, if my math is correct, maybe David could check me up on this, probably do it in his head, I'm conservatively saying that there were probably 20 well-armed, battle-hardened soldiers in Ben-Hadad's army for every one Hebrew, I don't even want to say soldier, for every one of the people within the city gates. When the Bible describes them in this passage, it mentions just 7,000. It doesn't say that they were soldiers. It just said they had 7,000 people in there that went out to go fight against them. So probably conservatively, it was at least 20-1 odds, maybe more than that. So obviously this is a great, great victory for them. And this story tells us some things about our own spiritual battles. So now that you know a little bit of history of the passage, I want to apply this to our lives if I can. I want you to see, first of all, the nature of the battle. Thank you, guys. Many Christian authors have written, elaborate articles or preached messages or even wrote entire books on the subject of spiritual warfare. So if I mention that term to you, spiritual warfare, and you don't know what I'm talking about, it would be good for you to grab one of these books and read them and get enlightened about what we're all engaged in as Christians, even living all of these years later. People like John Bunyan, if you read Pilgrim's Progress, which I don't mind saying again is a book that every Christian ought to read at some time in their lifetime. I'm not going to ask any of you if you've not read it, but if you would raise your hand, then you need to get a copy of that book and read Pilgrim's Progress. It's a phenomenal book. A.W. Tozer wrote extensively on spiritual warfare. A man that was known for his research and his Bible handbook, a man by the name of Merrill Unger. who wrote his handbook on a lot of things dealing with an overview of the Bible. He did tremendous research on that. Nevertheless, wrote more about spiritual warfare than any other subject. Some of you may not know that, but you can pick up some of Mayor Unger's work. And more recently, a man by the name of David Jeremiah. I just say that because I read his book on spiritual warfare. It's a great book, and I would highly recommend you read that one as well. If you want to know what these great men and authors are talking about as we engage in spiritual battles in our Christian lives. It's phenomenal to read some of these books. The Apostle Paul, although he was a Pharisee, not a soldier, and probably lived more of a white-collar kind of a life, he wrote extensively in his epistles about spiritual warfare. He told young Timothy to fight a good fight and be a sound soldier of the Lord Jesus Christ. He spent almost an entire chapter of Ephesians chapter 6 talking about who we're battling, what we need to do in our battle, what armor we need to be successful. And he wasn't even a military man. He wrote extensively on it in Ephesians chapter 6 and in other parts as well. So sometimes our spiritual battles are things that we're going to have to engage in personally or individually. Sometimes they are things that we confront as a group, like a church. We are engaged in a spiritual battle. There are forces of evil, Satan's forces, outside of the walls of this church that would seek to silence the voice of Christians and hinder the work of God. And we collectively are engaged in a battle. So passages like this that we read about has tremendous meaning for us. And I hope you remember that the next time you're tempted to get aggravated with or frustrated with or disunity would seek to harm the relationship that you have with another brother or sister in Christ. Remember this, we're all on the same team. We're all fighting the same battle. We all have the same foe. And quite frankly, we need each other to be successful. There are people in military settings who despise each other, on fellow soldiers that despise each other, who nevertheless band together for the purpose of defeating a viable enemy. And that's a picture of what the church should be like today. Sometimes we look into the eyes of these little children, and in particular, I've had a new little grandson come on the scene recently, and we think to ourselves, what a peaceful, nice life, just be lugged around everywhere, fed at demand, and sooner or later, no matter how much we try to protect these children and provide for them, and many parents make tremendous sacrifices for your children, and well, you ought to. You better realize this, at some point along the road in their development, they're going to face spiritual battles. They're going to have to fight their own battles, and you're not going to be there to stand in and protect them in those settings. Sometimes these battles come in different forms. We have fears and worries. There are temptations that we have to fight, trials that seem too great to bear on our own, besetting sins, the temptation all of us have every day of our lives to grow cold and apathetic in our Christian faith. We fight all of these things all of the time as part of our spiritual warfare. If you talk to some of our, some of the Christians who've been saved a long time, they've spent a good part of their lives fighting these battles. If you talk to them, you'll find out that they probably have some scars somewhere. They have things that they're hiding from the general population here at church. They don't come every week and say, oh man, I had some really low points in my life. I had times when Satan was beating me up, and it was a rough period of my life. And they have them. They have those times when they've been defeated, and they have those times when they have also been victorious. And you get to talk to Christians who have been down the road several years. You'll find out that God was there to protect them and to enable them all along the way. But there's a nature of the battle is we're all in it. We may say to God, who's going to order the battle? And he says to all of us today, thou. You and you and you and you and me. We are there in that battle. Don't miss that fact. Secondly, I want you to see the necessity of the battle. Outside of the Lord, nobody can fight those battles for you. I remember speaking with Aiden. He has an interest in war history and so forth, and we were talking about the fact that during the Civil War, some of you may know this, During the Civil War, if you had some financial resources, you could actually pay another man to go fight in your place in the Civil War. I'll tell you how much that amount was in a minute. But you know, that was a brutal war. If you read about it, more people died from disease and injury than they did from musket fire. It was a long, drawn-out, bitter, difficult war. And many people, we lost more people in the Civil War than any other war in American history. And you think about that in terms of the world wars and so forth. It was a terrible time to be in. Well, if you had enough money, you could send somebody in your place to fight for you. Anybody want to take a guess? First of all, anybody know that? Anybody know how much you could hire someone to go fight in your place? Anybody know how much that was? Now we're talking back in the Civil War time, so it's, you know, we have a little inflation since then, but can anybody guess how much you would have to pay to have someone go out and literally put their life on the line and go through the hardships and rigors of a terrible war, and so that your son or you could stay back and manage the plantation or whatever you wanted to do, you know? Anybody want to take a guess at how much money? $100. Who else said something? 50? I feel like I'm in an auction. You're kind of in the middle of something. It's $300. So listen, for the price of your PG&E bill next month, you could say, I don't want my son to have to go out there and be exposed to these terrible hardships, be away. I need him around here. I'm going to pay $300, which to them at that time was a lot of money. But you could do that to prevent yourself or your son from experiencing the perils of war and possibly losing his life. I wish we could do that spiritually. Wouldn't it be great to have a proxy? I'll say, I'm going to appoint someone to go through my spiritual battles. I just rather coast in life and take it easy and have a smooth sailing for the rest of my Christian life. I'm going to pay $300 or whatever it was. I would gladly fork out $300 or somebody to say, I'll fight your battles, spiritual battles for you, Pastor. I'd pay $3,000 in a heartbeat if I could avoid those things for the rest of my life. It doesn't work that way, folks. We all have to fight our own battles. We can give people encouragement and support. We can give them resources. We can help stand by them, but all of us are eventually going to be fighting our spiritual battles, and we have to endure those difficult times. So who shall order the battle? Thou is the answer to that. When David's troops were about to battle in what was another Civil War setting, battle the armies of Absalom, his son, he was anxious about the reports and what would happen. He took his leaders and military leaders aside, and he says, when you come across my son who is leading this rebellion in the nation, deal kindly with him. Spare his life. I know he's rebelling against me, but he's still my son, and I love him, and I don't want any harm to come to him. Well, you know how that factored out. David had a general in his army named Joab, who was not so sympathetic to Absalom, and he got involved in that situation, and they killed him. They killed David's son. And David has now got news of this terrible event. He's lamenting the death of his son in battle, and he says these words. I'm going to paraphrase, but he said, "Would God I had died for thee, Absalom." David, I believe, meant every word he said. I wish I could have taken his place. I would have willingly given my own life to allow my son to live. But the truth of the matter was, Absalom had to fight his battle. And he had to pay his own life for what he had done in this rebellion. And David, as much as he wanted to, could not do that. I see what some of our people in our church go through in terms of their own ups and downs. And in recent years, I guess it's true of every ministry. It just seems like every ministry, there are people in your church who go through tremendous hardships and difficulties, low points that I can't identify with. They may explain them to me, I can pray for them, but I really don't know what it's like to go through some of these things that some of you have gone through. And I wish so dearly in my heart, I mean this, I could somehow take your pain, take your place, help you endure that. And the reality is God doesn't allow us to do that. He has a path for each of us to travel, and he has hardships for each of us to go through. And some of our hardships are more difficult than others, and some people go through an inordinate amount of hardship. I was speaking to someone just this past week and rehearsing some of the events of their life and how their life has played out, and I said, my wife and I pray for you. We've thought about your situation in life, and we feel like, in essence, I said to this lady, we feel in some ways you've been shortchanged. And the reason I feel that way is because my wife and I have been tremendously blessed. Doesn't mean we haven't had problems. She lives with a problem every day of her life. Doesn't mean life is completely smooth sailing. We have difficulties, but I feel that some people have an inordinate amount, meaning from a human perspective, some people seem to suffer more than others. And when your life is going well and you have God's blessing upon your life, sometimes you're tempted to feel guilty that other people have hardship and difficulties in life. But then I said to her, but we need to remember this. God doesn't make any mistakes, and He has allowed these difficulties in your life as a way of fashioning you and molding you and making you the person you are. So for that, I don't apologize. I apologize for the pain and suffering and difficulty, but not the fact that God brings us to the deep waters, because God grows us through those experiences, and we wouldn't be the people we were but have to endure them. So, David realized that with his son. I noticed in verse number 20, it says they slew these 7,000, doesn't even say soldiers, people, slew every one his man. Every one of them had somebody they had to go fight. It wasn't like, hey, let's keep some of them back just to stick by the stuff, watch the equipment here. No, they went out and everyone had to fight someone in that battle. Of course, when you're outnumbered 20-1, yeah, you're gonna have a battle on your hands. And they all went out. Everyone picked a man, and they had a fight. And the point is, God brings adversity into our lives, and nobody is exempt from it. Paul, again, writing about that, he told Timothy to own this, recognize and own it. Quit you like men, he said. Get ready for that battle, and take on the armor of God, and fight. Do your part in fighting. Finally, number 3, the numbering of the battle. Earlier I said the odds were probably 20-1, and Ahab was told that he'd have to order it himself, but he was given that wonderful promise in verse 13. Thus saith the Lord, hast thou seen all this great multitude? Looking over the Syrian army out there. Behold, I will deliver it into thine hand this day, and thou shalt know that I am the Lord. Same thing happened to Jehoshaphat. He looked out again at a Syrian army one day, and he was fighting people, and in 2 Chronicles chapter 20, there was a great multitude, and yet God would give him the victory. In fact, he was reminded that the battle is not his, but God's. Elisha, same thing happened to Elisha when he was in the city, and he had his servant with him, and his servant got up early, and he looked in the mountains. He said, what? My eyes are playing tricks on me. It must be the shadows from the sun. He said, oh my goodness. They're camped around the city. We're in big trouble. Talk about bad odds. It was probably thousands to 2. Elisha and his servant, that's all. And all these people out there. And Elisha prayed that God would open his eyes and he could see not only the armies of the enemy, but he could see the chariots of fire and all of God's angels around the city protecting him. In Pilgrim's Progress, when his name was Valiant for Truth, that's why I said y'all all should read Pilgrim's Progress. He received his orders to go over the river. When you read Pilgrim's Progress and the directions are given to go over the river, what does that mean? Yeah, who said that? You obviously read Pilgrim's Progress. When it talks about a river and going over a river in Pilgrim's Progress, that's a symbol for death. So this Valiant for Truth is told to go over the river, and listen to what he said. He said, my sword I give to him that shall succeed me in my pilgrimage, and my courage and skill to him that can get it. Got to get it yourself. I'll give my sword away, but you got to get that courage yourself. He said, my marks and scars I carry with me to be a witness for me that I have fought his battles, who now will be my rewarder. And then he stepped into the river and he said, O death, where is thy sting? That's the picture Bunyan was trying to give us of what it's like to truly be a child of God, to be engaged in battle, take your scars with you, but when you finish that race, say as Paul did, I have fought a good fight. The battle is not yours, it's God's. Father, we thank you for this.